Well, good evening. And thank you all for joining us tonight as we wrap up our Spring 2013 Grace Lecture Series. It's an honor for me to introduce our speaker tonight. She's relatively new to Chadron State College. Dr. Joe Forstrom is the Dean of Teaching and Learning and Dean of Liberal Arts. I think I got that right. Prior to joining the administration at Chadron State College, Dr. Forstrom was a professor at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. She holds a master's degree, an undergraduate degree, and a doctorate degree in philosophy. So she's somewhat of a philosopher and has a lot of knowledge on John Locke. Tonight she's going to enlighten us a little bit on intellectual property, open educational resources, and academic integrity. So would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Joe Forstrom.
Thank you. I'm hoping to keep this relatively short and sweet. And what we're going to be talking about tonight then is the concept of what open means and what property means and how that kind of applies in the academic world. And because I am a philosopher, you're going to discover that I try to ground things in things that I know a lot about. In this case, I know an awful lot about John Locke. And so John Locke was 1632 to 1704, and he's one of the most influential early modern philosophers. And his influence is felt in many areas. Here's I can get another picture of him, from a selected correspondence. This is when he's wearing a wig. That one he apparently is not, or it's a really bad wig. And you'll see after that I've given the source of the photo that's there, and it's in the Creative Commons. It's a Wikimedia file, and I discovered it by using Google Advanced Search, searching by Creative Commons licenses. And so as I understand it, I'm allowed to use it without fear that they're going to come after me and ask me for money. Because I'm using it in a public lecture, I'm not getting paid, and I'm not going to sell this lecture when it's over, because I doubt there would be a market for it. In contrast, notice that I have a book cover that has this lovely picture of John Locke, and this book was published by Oxford University Press. I'm quite confident that if I were to look inside, that I would find that they had gotten permission, probably from the Bodleian Library, that I'm not quite sure, who actually owns this image. And they obtained permission before they published and shared it with the world yet again in this amazing book about John Locke's selected correspondence. Trust me, there's a lot of images out there, because there's a lot of things that Locke wrote that have been reprinted, and we know that people like pretty pictures. Now, the weird thing is notice I'm showing it. Ooh, isn't it a nice book? Isn't that a great wig? Don't you wish you had a wig like that? Yes, indeed. And he was a brilliant and influential person, not just because he had good taste in wigs, but because he had a good understanding of what we were doing as we tried to form society. Locke, as a political philosopher, was influential on the foundation of American democracy because Locke's work was read by everyone we think of when we think of the founding of America. In particular, Thomas Jefferson was very much influenced by Locke. And it's important to know that because when we think about America back in the day, from the English perspective, they saw America as this land where they could just take, and you go west and you get your stuff and it's yours. You can make your life, you just had to take from the common. And it was yours. And that kind of version of property, that there's stuff out there, that the world was created in a way so that we could, through our hard work and industry, appropriate from the common resources what we need in order to be successful. That's why the world is there, is so we can use it, we can own it, it is ours. And the foundation of that is we own ourselves. And that's really foundational to Locke, is self-ownership. You can own property because you own yourself. And you mix yourself with stuff, and that stuff becomes yours. But there's limits on that. And this is an actual little quote from Locke, and I apologize because it's long, and you'll see why you have to have a certain level of Locke to read Locke and really distill and enjoy him the way I do. I'm going to go ahead and read it aloud, and then we're going to talk through it in normal, human-friendly English. And please note that this is again from Wikipedia, and if we were to look at, and we could, if we had early English books online or the Wayne collection, we could find some of the, when it was first published, you'd see the typography and fonts, and you would see that the way the capitalized text was quite different, making it even yet more unreadable. But this is a slightly modernized version of it so that the capitalization is normal to our eyes. Someone went through and edited it and did it, and that's why I have to give credit in some ways that this is not my typeface, this is not my editing. This was something I found that they put out there and allowed people to use. Okay, so, nor was this appropriation of any parcel of land by improving it any prejudice to any other man, since there was still enough and as good left, and more than yet unprovided could use. So that in effect there was nevertheless left for others because of his enclosures for himself. For he that leaves as much as another can make use of does as good as take nothing at all. Nobody could think himself injured by the drinking of another man, though he took a good drop, who had a whole river of the same water left to him to quench his thirst. And the case of land and water, where there is enough of both, is perfectly the same. Okay, in human-friendly English, what did we just find out? Well, let's look at it sentence by sentence. That first sentence. Now, if I had a pointer or a highlighter, with magical, I suppose I could do it that way. But we're just going to pretend that I'm like saying, in the first sentence, do any words jump out at you that kind of you could like interpret and you could like put that sentence in normal Americanized 21st century English?
Yes, you have to prove it up. Homesteading.
It's important.
You have to prove up the land, and it's yours.
And there's plenty left.
Just good enough, and there's plenty left.
Yeah.
Yes. And did you have an unfair advantage in getting your plot?
No, because you've labored for it.
Right. And so any prejudice to any other man means everyone else had a chance. They just didn't take foolish people. And there's still enough left that if they have the initiative, they can go and get what they need because there's enough left. Have you done something to the land other than say, mine?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've improved it. And so that's the appropriation of that parcel of land. Remember, we can talk about property, what is proper, properia from the Latin, what is unique, or what is unique to the individual, well, won't go that way. But this appropriation, you make it yours, you mix yourself with it. Because that's the first sentence. Second sentence. There was nevertheless left for others because of his enclosure for himself. What you did to it doesn't make it impossible for other people to get theirs. And does this third sentence also kind of say that? Does it offer anything else there?
As another can make use of. So, if somebody can't make use of it, then it doesn't matter if he took more, right?
As long as there's enough left for others to use, and it's a good enough quality that they can use it successfully. Sometimes we talk about what happens if you're the first person who comes upon an apple orchard where the trees are full of fruit. Can you take all that fruit if there are other hungry people in your community?
Yes, and sell it to them.
What? Exactly. Wait, see, you're exactly right, because there is a theory about property. Once you own it, it's yours. You can do things with it, like sell it. That means other people have to have stuff that you can barter or take in exchange for giving it to them. But if they don't have anything, and if this is the only source of food available, can you take it, all of it, hoard it, and call it mine, my precious, precious apple? Yes, exactly. You got the reference. Precious? No. Why not? Because you've not left enough for others to have that opportunity of their own. Now, suppose you're the first person to the orchard, and you go through and you get a number of apples, and you turn them into apple pie. Can you sell your apple pies, assuming other people have money for them? And if they say, well, I don't want that apple pie, you can say, that's fine, go get yourself an apple, make applesauce. Can you rope off that orchard and say, it's mine, all mine, no applesauce for you. No apple pie for you. You have to come to me, I'm the sole owner of the apples. Well, maybe in some conditions, maybe if there was a cherry orchard next door and they were like, yeah, well, I got the cherries and I'm making cherry wine. I'd be like, good plan. Of course, then I would go into apple cider production. Hey, civilization is built on such things. Okay, continuing back to the Lockean proviso. The next glorious sentence is a nice example. And it resonates with most people. When we think of a river and fresh water, as long as if you take a good drink of it, as long as you leave water next, for the next person to have you taken more than your fair share? And when Locke wrote, in the case of land and water, was there enough of both, land and water, for anyone who's willing to work hard to come and homestead or do what they needed to do to live a good life?
Yes.
No.
Depending on where you were.
Yeah, in some ways this is like a historic fable and a great, romantic way of looking at America and its resources. And it admits a lot of obvious things, like that there were other people here already and it was kind of their land. Leaving that to the side and recognizing that this idea of property, of there's common resources and you use them and you appropriate them and you make them yours is, well, kind of what we're talking about. Because if we don't have physical resources available to us freely and easily anymore, what do we have? If I say, well, if I ask a student, well, what are you going to do, given that we really don't have a lot of good land left for homesteading? How are you going to make your way in this world, young person?
Sell your labor.
Sell your labor, yeah, but what kind of labor are they going to sell? Is it
All kinds of labor, ditch digging labor, intellectual labor.
Yes, and do we have when we think about intellectual labor, how does someone develop the intellectual skills necessary to hire themselves out at good rates?
Learn how to market themselves?
Yes. Do they have to, before you market yourself, do you have to know how to read?
Yes, you got to teach yourself to read.
Because after all, 4-year-olds are innately curious and they can't wait just to write books and read them on their own.
Well, that's true in some cases.
Indeed, especially in cases where there's things like books in the house. You can watch small children and they open up the books and they try to read because they've been read to. And it's really quite adorable because they're just repeating back what they've heard or they're making up stories. How is it that if we think that we have to have things available in this world so that people can mix themselves with them in order to support themselves and have a good life, what is the obvious thing that we tend to do these days or tend to rely on these days that, especially in the world of academe, is kind of common, or we think, in America at least, should be commonly available so that people work hard, they can be successful?
Education.
Exactly.
The labor.
Education.
It's assessment.
What?
Assessment.
Assessment of education, yes, because it's not being taught
Just say
clearly.
assessment.
Yeah. Well, but with education, we have this idea that when people create stuff, they're doing it in a way and for a purpose to share their knowledge for the common good, for the betterment of humankind, for all these lofty, wonderful things. And when we think about Locke, and we start thinking about this, we're like, oh, there's stuff out there. Well, there's not physical stuff really all that much unless you have some money and a grub stake and whatnot. But there's a possibility through education and hard work that you can read books. You can listen to your sage teacher, to your wonderful kindergarten teacher, that 4th grade instructor. I mean, I remember my teachers. Do all of you? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did any of you go to public school for at least part of your education? Why do you think we have public school in this country? How do we pay for public schools usually in most municipalities and such? On what?
Property.
On what type of property? Land. Think about it. In America, we realize, hey, wait, there's not enough land. Maybe we want to provide opportunities for people who work hard to be successful. How will we make sure that the land supports education, but through property taxes, so the land continues to support that common resource and the development of that common resource? Interesting connection. Okay, changing gears slightly to intellectual properties. That was our little bit of Locke. Kind of like thinks a few things through. Now, when we talk about intellectual property, we're talking about stuff that we have created, or that other people have created, that's ideas, that's not apples, applesauce, apple pies, cherry wine, or apple cider. And it's things like books, like my book, which you should all go out and buy, so that I can get royalties from the sale of it. It's on John Locke and personal identity, immortality and bodily resurrection in the 17th century. We might want a close-up of it. Originally, it retailed for $120. It's now issued in paperback that's much cheaper. You can also get it as an e-version.
Is there a copy in the library so we can just check it out?
I don't know if I've yet made that donation because I'm not sure that I want to share. Because while I agree that scholars should have access to my powerful ideas, I'm not sure that I want them widely and easily and cheaply distributed. So, when we think about intellectual property, is there a way in which the common knowledge that we all have, that we got from school, is it really common to everyone? Are there ways in which intellectual property is like, well, someone knows that, so everybody knows that, so we should just share it? Yes. No. We could discuss. And we could also think about the parallel, not just intellectual property, but with physical property, like books or, you know, my Kermit cup. And then we can ask ourselves the question, can I take someone else's stuff? Can I take someone's property? And the answer is yes, no, it depends. On what?
Yeah, I think that to just go back to your earlier question, whether the common knowledge, common intellectual property, I think, yeah, theoretically, yeah, we can take it, but I think access is a big issue, like whether all the people have equal access or not.
Sometimes scholars write stuff and they share stuff, and we know this like from some library databases, not to pick on my library peeps, because you know I love you. But some of the publishers with their databases is really quite expensive. Remember when I talked really quickly about early English books online? That is an amazing database. Why? Because someone went through and they have copies of everything that was published in the English language before before 1700. All the first editions, second editions, third editions. And they created this and they microfished it. And they then sold it to libraries. And so when I was in grad school, I used a microfilm reader, maybe microfiche, microfilm, and to find, you know, Locke's work in all its different editions. So I was very curious, as only a graduate student in philosophy can be, about whether there were significant changes between the different editions, and to particular chapters and sub-chapters within. Because if you change like 3 words, it might be very significant. Good times. And so I spent hours, you know, with a microfilm reader, you know, printing out things at 10 cents a page. Yeah, the royalties on this book, where like that stuff ended up in like 4 footnotes, do not cover my microfilm costs. They cover a dinner out once a year with my husband. That collection has been digitized. And there was a time about 12 years ago when I looked into how much it would cost so that I, as a professor at a small college with a very small library budget, could have access to it so I could continue my very important research. At that time, it was $25,000 a year.
Oh, jeez.
Well, they had to go from microfilm to digital collections in a searchable form. Wow! So what do you think I did?
Stole
No.
No.
I wrote myself a faculty development grant, and I applied for and I got myself a grant to go to a major research library which had paid for this resource, and then I used it at that library for a week and just copied out the pages that I actually needed for my work and a few other things that I thought would be foundational for future work. But this was work from 1694. Yes. But had someone taken that book that was clearly in the public domain and done something special to it, microfilmed it, digitized it, turned it into a PDF that was searchable, yes. Did they now own it again? Could I distill it from them? Well, maybe. No, we don't distill. We ask permission. We use it within the rules. We cite it. In general, we say we don't take other people's stuff, and it's very clear for people that we don't steal cookies. Well, sometimes we borrow cookies, and we return them with different types of cookies a week later. But in general, people are pretty good about saying, no, stealing is wrong. Except if it's someone's ideas or someone's work and they want to use it for their own. Am I right there?
No.
Do people steal ideas more easily than they steal stuff? Physical stuff?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
Because it's not as tangible.
It meets the Lockean proviso. If I use the book, I leave as much and as good for everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why intellectual property is in some ways in the domain and it's available for people to use. But when you read the book and you return it so someone else can use it, do you then take what you got from the book and turn around and sell it? And put your name on it?
Well, some people do.
Mm-hmm. And what happens to them?
They get caught, we hope.
And the lawyers exact the revenge from the publishers, yes.
And they say the Lockean proviso isn't good enough.
It has problems.
There are other considerations.
Indeed, there are. Okay, so copyright. Things that are in the public domain, fair use, these are concepts that are very important. When we talk about things being in the public domain, what does that mean in your experience? As a scholar or as a student?
It means that we can use it without stressing out about copyright.
Mm-hmm.
But you still must cite,
You still have to cite. Why?
because it's not your original, not property, but thought, idea.
Yeah, it's not yours. It's still someone else's, even if it's out there for you to use. Things that are in the public domain might be things like John Locke's work, the original versions. We can go and we can read them and we can discuss them. And if I wanted to, I suppose that I could go and I could edit and create a new version based on it. And that would be maybe a fair use of it, of things that are in the public domain. Could I take it in such a way that no one could go back to that source and do their own version? Because that's why it's in the public domain. Now, my book, John Locke and Personal Identity, second flood court. Oh yeah, no, you want a copy? Oh, yes, yes. No, okay. So, is it in the public domain?
No.
No. Well, why not?
1927.
And what happened in 1927?
I don't know. All I know is that that's the cutting off point for things that happen in public domain.
It must be copyright.
Copyright law.
Well, this was published not by me. It's not a self-published book. It's a legitimate publisher, Continuum Press, which I know you know about. He also has a book published through them. And so they own really the rights to the book in many key ways. They pay me royalties, which means I get a percentage of sales, which is why you all must buy a very expensive copy. But it also is because I'm still alive. I filed for copyright. And at some point, will this book go into the public domain? After I'm dead, and if no one cares to renew the copyright. But even if they care enough to renew the copyright, will it eventually go into the public domain?
Yes.
Yes. Probably when it's, but do you think people will care? No. I'm very sure that people won't care about this book in like 125 years. Okay, it's possible, but it's unlikely. Okay.
Joe, I think if you got a different book jacket on it, it would probably go better.
The wig.
You know,
If
if I had gotten the wig version, unfortunately, OUP, Oxford University Press, this book came from them, and I'm sure that they had to pay royalties for this image. When you use images that, you know, are like in the Lockean, they protect their stuff, they own it, they market it, you have to pay copyright. With my book, I had to actually do copyright applications to places where I was getting quotes from, because after a certain number of words you have to get explicit permission from the publisher of the original words in order to show that you have not violated their intellectual property. And that was like yet another fun thing I did while writing the book that just took multiple hours. Oh, it was good times. Yes. When I think about the amount of hours I spent producing this quality manuscript for, you know, a good price, again, my labor comes out to like 10 cents an hour, the royalties. Maybe not even that. Oops, sorry. So when you use images and such in your work, and you publish it, where someone's going to get paid, even if you get very little, you have to pay royalties. You have to file paperwork. You have to fill out forms, multiple forms. Sometimes you then file forms about your forms, especially if you're going to claim it as a legitimate business deduction on your own taxes. Oh yeah, good times. And see, people are nodding because they've done this. Yes. Here at Chadron State College, if you had a question about whether you could use or not use something, where would you go to get that answer?
Dean?
The library.
I go to Dean,
Are you good to Dean? Dean,
He's closer.
Brad, why would you go to Dean?
because he's closer.
Do you think Dean would actually give you an accurate response?
I trust him implicitly.
I'm so sorry.
And Dean, are you willing to take that burden upon yourself? Or where would you
Not-
go with Brad's question?
Not explicitly. I would go to the library.
Yep. Or maybe Google it and see if that also came up with some useful information.
That's what you said, CSC.
Yeah.
I would walk to the library.
Ooh, even
Do
better.
that. No, I'd probably, yeah, I know what you mean. I'd go to the Library of Congress.
So far we've talked about, where property comes from, intellectual property, and some of the interesting things that kind of relates to Locke's notion of property, and that it's mine and you have to buy it if you want to read it. What happens if I actually wanted to share it? I could give it to the library, and then you could check it out, because that is how intellectual property is in part protected, because it's acknowledged it's a book, and it means one of you could read it at a time. It's one way. Could I make a photocopy of it and send it around to everyone and say, here, read this? Shh.
I wouldn't do that.
Why not?
I think your publisher might get a little irate.
But it's my work. I wrote it. It's my book. But it's not. Once it's published and it's copyrighted, it's no longer just mine. I've now licensed it in a way that there's rules and restrictions about what can be done with it. So if I wanted to share some of my great ideas about John Locke, personal identity, immortality, and bodily resurrection in the 17th century, what could I do? And still be respectful that my publishers have an interest in this book being successful and selling.
Digital commons.
What?
Put in the digital commons.
Not in its current form. No, I can't digitize it and share it that way. That would violate their property.
10% rule.
No, I don't think that's going to work.
It's gonna be-
Again, the copy to the library, that's really the way that you share books. Maybe digital copies, you encourage people to buy it. Maybe I give it away as, a fun door prize. No.
Like fair use, if I need to do it in,
Yeah,
for a class project and I can make copies, I'm not making any profit.
Right, I might say, here, copy what you need, but no more than 10% of it. I might say, buy your own copy. There'd be a variety of things that theoretically we could do. So is this book really going to end up being freely available and being shared widely? Well, in some ways, yes. In many ways, no. What if I had things that I didn't necessarily feel as strongly connected to, that I wanted to share?
You could you do a copyright release.
Mm-hmm.
And I've forgotten exactly how it works, but you can fill out a form and license it or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and it allows your intellectual property to be out in the commons.
Mm-hmm. Right, so there are things that I could do that would release my copyright. I don't know if I could get my publisher to release their copyright. It'd be more likely that I would create another work that was significantly different from this one, but still somewhat the same, that had the latest version of the ideas, and that maybe was more readable and maybe more public and friendly. And I might do this as a series of PowerPoints or easy readers or guides or Microsoft Word texts. And I could just put it on my website. Not that I have a website, but theoretically, if I had a website, I could say, here's some of my ideas about Locke. Here's some of my ideas about Thomas Hobbes and Rene Descartes, and don't get me started on Robert Boyle. Fascinating, fascinating philosophers. Trust me, of the 17th century. Locke wrote all about them. It's in the book. Seriously, you can't wait to cure your insomnia with this book.
And what's the title of the book again?
Oh, damn, you're going for bonus points tonight. If I wanted to share my intellectual property, I could share a newer version of it, and I might also put it out there. If you wanted to share your intellectual property, would you just write stuff and post it to the web? Sure. What if you could write a blog? Your blog about Locke, your blog about how much you love intellectual property. Ooh, and copyright, this is wonderful, fun stuff. If you just put it out there, are you allowing other people to use it, to read it, to do things with it? How would you feel if you had posted something on a blog, which is somewhat of a public space, and then someone cut and pasted from your blog into their Comp 1 paper and turned it in to Dr. Barr? And Dr. Barr said, hey Joe, did you know, or hey Dean, did you know that that blog that you wrote 2 years ago about your deep, deep love of Western movies
And John Locke.
and how John Locke is that significant figure in the backstory of so many of them? How that really funky, fun blog, you know, that you wrote, how a student submitted it for a Comp 1 grade, and I gave it a D. Because it was kind of rambling, and I didn't really understand and share your understanding of the symbolism.
Well, she should have Googled it and found out it was plagiarized, and it probably would have gotten an
And then she would have had to buy the
A
book.
by the book.
Yeah. Do we really like the thought of putting our intellectual property out there and having people just take it and use it and claim it as their own?
No.
Does it seem like stealing?
Yes.
So, are there ways to share your stuff legitimately that constrains what people can and cannot do to your thoughts and your intellectual and creative property? Yes. And I actually have a handout from the Creative Commons, and this is one type of license. You can take one and pass. Like, see, handout. Ooh, I'm interactive. This way. And you know, in my fascinating, beautiful, powerful PowerPoint, of also which is a handout, you'll see that there is a link if you want to go to it. Get out a future date or share it with others. Because this is obviously in the Creative Commons is commonly available. And as you look through it, you'll see that it has what our licenses do. So you can license things. It's like a type of copyright or respects copyright, but it's like saying this is mine and this constrains what you can and cannot do. Let's see that copy. Yeah. So there's layers of license. There's the legal code, there's the human readable, and there's machine readable. And they put a lot of thought into this. Remember how we started talking about Locke? We had to put it into human readable or human understandable language? Yeah. When we get into really complicated legal stuff, most of us don't understand what they're talking about. And so what Creative Commons does, or did, is they created a type of licenses, and if you look on the back, oh my gosh, there's 6 different. And they have these little icons that tell you what you can and cannot do. You can just attribution. And so I'll let you look through them. I'm trying to decide if, to this PowerPoint, I should put a Creative Commons license. And if so, which one? Because, you know, this PowerPoint is just so amazing. I know that people can't wait to submit it as their own work by just taking my name off, putting their name on, and trying to get credit for it in a course. Okay, yeah, that's highly unlikely, isn't it? Is there a possibility that someone will say, well, this is kind of an interesting sort of linkage. I think I want to explore it further. Perhaps I would like to actually add background and better images. They'd like to tweak it and make it more attractive. Should they still maybe give me some credit that the bones of the idea and the way the ideas were developed were mine? But am I comfortable with the idea that someone who's much better at PowerPoint, which is probably many of you and all of the students in this room, that they could improve this PowerPoint presentation? Yeah, you should. Yeah, it's like, you're like black and white. Yes, didn't you know that I like black and white and very simple colors? It's my modernistic impulse. And there would be a license that would allow someone to do that. There's licenses which forbid people changing anything, and there's licenses which allow people to attribute to me, but to remix and make it their own, and maybe attribute it back to me when they're done, and to share it back so that I know what's going on with my work. There are licenses which allow people to take this, and if they want to, do a whole lot of work to it and try to get money for it. Okay, how you would do that with a PowerPoint, I don't actually know, but there's a world in which that could occur, and if that is this world, and someone can make money, kindly buy me dinner when you see me at a conference, and we'll call it good. Okay, so there's different types of Creative Commons licenses that are available, and they all allow you to share your ideas and intellectual property while retaining your ownership of that property in a way that is significant and important and kind of respects our intuitions, our American intuitions that are kind of based on Locke. Now, OER, moving on to a little bit more explicit. OER is an acronym for Open Educational Resources. And we often think that this means that stuff is free. Now, just because it's free, and you are allowed to use it because it has an appropriate Creative license, Commons license, it doesn't mean that it comes with no strings attached. It doesn't mean you can just take and say, mine! Because you have to respect the license. Respecting the license means respecting the people's intellectual ownership of the ideas and the things that they created. So just because it's free doesn't mean it's yours. It means you can use it. So can I use it? Yes. If you see an image out on the web, and I don't know about you, when I was preparing this PowerPoint, I started Googling images, and I was like, wait a minute. I'm giving a talk about intellectual ownership and property. I best not be using other people's copyrighted stuff without getting permission from them, and I don't have time to email them and get the permission, because I'm sure they would grant it, but you know what? I haven't asked, so I better not use. So I looked to see with the licenses of the images to see whether there would be things that I could, use. And so, yes, you'll notice I put the source of where I got the stuff from. And that allowed me to use it without feeling like I was going to be turned into the academic integrity police or the intellectual property lawyer police. But it's because of the way the people who created the images or created the information shared it and the way they licensed it. As long as you respect the license, you can use it. And so here's some neat resources, and I don't know if I can actually go out to them, but, oh, I can. Oh, life is good. We'll see if this works. There's ways to easily find open educational resources, and wow, of course, the security codes. Oh yeah, there it goes. And so it's really cool. Would anyone like to see an image of something that we think would be appropriate? Like of a photo image, or if we wanted music or videos. Any suggestions?
Oh, I don't know. Can you find a better picture of John Locke?
Find a video of Locke.
You don't like his curly wig?
I don't like it.
See, now this tells us that there are a number of different ways. So if I did a Google search, a Google advanced search, technology is great when it works the way it's supposed to, isn't it? Okay, so I want to find a picture with John Locke. And I want to narrow my search. Okay, since it's an image, we don't care about the language. We care about the usage rights. I want something that I am free to use, share, or modify, even commercially. Okay, and
You can go to images up there.
I'm sorry.
You can go to images up to the left there, next to web. Down.
Down.
Oh, goodness. Well,
Either way.
there we
Yeah,
go.
there's that,
Yeah, unfortunately, Locke is,
He's
without,
very sensitive about his hair, wasn't he?
it was the style of the time. Yeah. He was a doctor, as well as being involved in philosophy. So these are images of John Locke. Now, that is not the same John Locke that I know and love. That is a show that I've never seen an episode of because I think I was working on the book during that time.
That's funny.
Well, and that's part of the fun of like looking for images, right? Is that, hold on. Oh no, goodness. And you have to be careful what you find.
There's a wig.
Yeah,
There's the turban.
there's the wig.
I like
Oh,
the red
there's
turban.
one that's, you know, the colored wig.
She's nightcap.
That's when he's young. He never married.
Can you tell it?
Well,
That doesn't surprise me somehow.
okay, so that is an example. Oh, wait, close current tab. That is an example of one way to locate easily OER materials. There's another neat sort of OER resource. Suppose you wanted to go and read something just because you thought it would be fun, and you don't have access to the library here at CSC because it's closed, and you're reading at 2 in the morning, and you know you just want to read, and you don't have the money to buy a book, but you do have internet, and you can download things. The Open Library has collected a number of texts that are, you know, you can borrow, read, and compare. And let's see if they have anything by Locke. Oh, 7 editions. Oh, Locke by John Locke. Oh, what? Oh, it's his political essays. Oh, that's good reading.
Not as good as, what's the title you?
I think I don't know, you gotta take a taste of Locke with like the proviso. Imagine reading an entire book like that. It might cure insomnia more than my book does. I'm not sure though. But, oh, so using Open Library, you might be able to find resources out there that you could use. If you wanted to find like, you know, a video about why open education, which is another sort of things that people are doing with OER, which is creating texts and materials for people to use in classes. Because as you probably guessed, when you buy textbooks, they are expensive. And so there's a move to try to make textbooks, to reduce textbook costs for students without sacrificing quality. So there's a lot of people who are working on that type of approach to education. I know here at CSC we're looking at continued participation in the Kaleidoscope project, where we develop courses which use only open educational resources, or things that are free. Well, we have to attribute where we got them from, but that people don't have to pay money for. And if you create a course or you use those sorts of materials, the students aren't buying textbooks. And that can be a considerable savings to them and really help them to acquire the knowledge and become the sort of person that they want to be and go out and get good jobs and live a good life here in America. Now, I promised I'd talk about academic integrity. Can I use the CC image? Yes. In a paper or presentation. Can I submit it like an image that has been CC, Creative Commons license? Can I take that image? Like this image of the typewriter, which you will see later in a little bit. Can I say, here, do I have an art professor here? No. Can I say, Dr. Tucker, look at my beautiful image. You asked us to provide an image for our, wait, Nancy, I'm sorry, I forgot. Nancy, look at this picture that's mine. I'm taking a class from you. What grade will you give me for giving you this beautiful picture of a typewriter?
Well, if they just turn that in just like that.
Well, assuming that it was to take a picture of a typewriter. And I said, look, this is my image. I got it. It's Creative Commons license. I can share it. I can use it. Give me a grade. You're looking puzzled. Why?
Because that's not what I would be wanting.
You actually want me to interact with the camera? You've seen me with PowerPoints. Can you imagine the horror of me with a camera?
No, I mean, if they have to take a photograph, they go take a photograph of an actual typewriter.
But how do you know this person didn't do that? Well, someone did it. It just wasn't me. You expect me to take the picture because I'm in the class about taking pictures? You are a hard teacher. Really.
Use your phone and take one.
My personal cell phone doesn't have a camera. I'm not really good with images. Could I use this image in a paper or presentation if I gave credit? Sure. Could I turn this image in and say, it's my work, give me a grade, because it's mine, it's my photo? Oh, heck no. Just because something's free, it's on the internet, and we're able to share it, can't we take it and say, it's mine, give me a grade? Heck no. Sharing is good, but sharing requires that you acknowledge that it's someone else's stuff that you are borrowing. And citations, even of internet sources, are possible. I mean, I don't know about you, but when a student, when I was teaching, would tell me, but Dr. Forstrom, I didn't know how to cite that. And I would say things like, have you ever heard of a style manual? By a show of hands, how many of you have a style manual in your office or creative space? How many of you have more than one? You mean there's multiple ways to cite this horrible stuff? Oh, the horror! Okay, why are there multiple ways to cite stuff? Yeah, because it depends on where you're going to publish or present it as to what format you're supposed to use. Is it really annoying to have to go through and change from APA to MLA or to use Chicago Manual?
Yes.
Yes.
But if you just go to nightsite.com,
Yeah,
you don't have any of those books.
Uh-huh.
Or the library sites, you know, the citations are on.
So what you're saying is we have the technology to make it even easier to cite things. How many of you back in the day were like, okay, so it was a lecture that I took notes on, and this is a direct quote from that professor, and I'm going to be a really good student and show them that I listened to what they said, and so I'm going to use a quote from them. I need to cite that appropriately in the footnote that is, of course, placed, yes, at the bottom of the page. How far up from the bottom of the page? An inch. And you had to have a line, and the line had to be a certain length. You know, if you didn't have that line right, what did you have to do? You had to retype it, because that was what you showed, how you showed you were a good student. But with that thing, would you look in your style manual and be like, okay, how would I cite that? And you would go and you would look and you would find, you'd figure out what to italicize, what to underline, what to put in quotes. Oh, by the way, did any of you ever use italicization when you were in school? No. Why not?
Underline.
We used underlining. Why would you use underline and not the beauty of italicization?
Because typewriters wouldn't italicize.
Yep, exactly. Our technology of using a typewriter constrained how we could cite and what we could do. If on this model you wanted to do an italicized version, what physically would you do?
Shift the page, turn the page.
Yeah, you'd have to get new keys.
You might have two typewriters. You might have the first typewriter where you then have the blank spaces, and then you would have the second typewriter that had the italicization in it, and then you could like type it on the first one, and you could run it through the second one to type it in there, and those were good times. Oh yeah. And with underlining, was underlining just like a Control-U and just like type the stuff in? No. With underlining, you type the stuff in, and before you don't hit return, because if you hit return, you're just lost. And so you have, because you have the backspace and you do the underline button. Oh yeah, I remember that. It was so much fun. I also remember that I was told that when you did a footnote or a direct quote, you had to put like the number up, and so you had to figure out how to turn the typewriter just so you could get it slightly raised and then put it back down so that it was all the same. And you also had to calculate carefully that you had the right number of footnotes, space between the main body of the paper, the footnotes, and the bottom of the page. By a show of hands, how many of you used to do this? How many hours did you spend?
Your allowance to get somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
How many? And honestly, were there people who helped people in college by typing their papers for them? And it wasn't like they were writing the papers, or that may have occurred. Back in the day, it was you would type a rough draft, you would figure out your footnotes, you would do all the typo corrects, and then you would probably hand it to professional typists so that it would be done properly. Why? Because it was a pain. It was hard. It was annoying. And what happened if you changed one citation? Did it screw up the pagination of the entire product?
Yes.
And so did you have to retype it?
Yes.
Now, was that part of the discipline of being an educated person, was being able to plan in advance so you could get it typed out in a rough draft so you could do the proper modifications, you could do the reviews and the edits, and you could retype it maybe twice more before it was perfect? What happened if you had typos? Depended on your professor. Some professors would circle them and make you retype the paper from the start so that you showed that you had carefully proofread and edited. Uh-huh. Wow. Good times. What do we do now? We have computers that do it all for us. If you're in Microsoft Word, you can actually just put the information into the boxes and it will format it 8 different ways for you. It probably comes up with ways to cite stuff, just in case there might be a new emerging style manual out there. If you have questions about, well, how do I cite this, that, or the other thing, it's in Word. Or it's in other programs. I remember when EndNote came out, I was finishing up my dissertation, or working on my dissertation, it was like $200. And I thought long and hard about buying it. Ultimately, I was too cheap. And so I did all my footnotes the good old-fashioned way by using Turabian, because Turabian is code for Kate L. Turabian, Manual for Writers of Term Papers, Theses, and Dissertations. This is a book that will also cure insomnia. It is also a book that if you're in the humanities, you really should own a copy. It is a wonderful book. It's a wonderful resource. And even if you have Word, you maybe have a copy of it. Yes. Why? Well, because it's just good to have. Okay, so to summarize, I have taken you on a fun little journey grounded in John Locke's understanding of property, where we have walked thoughtfully through intellectual property, open educational resources, and academic integrity. I appreciate your time. Do you have questions about any of the things we kind of quickly covered tonight?
No, but I'm going to have nightmares about writing papers with typewriters.
And she forgot the carbon copy.
Yeah, I was thinking, carbon copies of the real thing.
We can't say it's like we walked 5 miles through the snow, because it's just as difficult for students today to cut and paste off the internet into the paper. It's just as hard. It takes just as much work and just as much. You have to actually Google, so. Actually, I do have a serious question.
Sure.
This notion of OER when it comes to original research, what role does peer review play? I don't know much about it. But I know that there are open resource journals that are still peer reviewed.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to answer it by looking at one of my favorite resources. I'm going to turn this back on. It's not about a journal. It's about something that I know more about. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I bet Brad knows about it too.
Yeah.
Have you ever used it?
Yep.
Now, it's peer reviewed, but it's open. How is it peer reviewed? Well,
Same way Wikipedia is peer reviewed. I mean, people are just volunteering their time to keep it up.
Actually, Wikipedia is a different way of peer reviewing.
Well, sure, but I'm
yes.
analogous.
Yeah. What the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy did is that they invited philosophers for the glory of publication, to write articles. They send them out for peer review, and then they publish them through there. And if there are significant problems found with it, the article can be edited, I believe, or can be reported to the editors for updating. And so it's acknowledged within the discipline that this is a good resource because of the quality of people who are selected for the initial articles and the way that it's handled.
But so that it just means it's free for the public to access without having to pay for a journal fee. Because I know science is allowed. There's some scientific journals like this, right? That are like this.
Yes.
Are they? They're looked upon as just as prestigious, or whatever word you want to use, because they're peer reviewed.
Yeah.
So you can use them for actual science.
Yes.
A lot of them are just cyber journals. You know,
Yeah.
They're just the psychology, Journal of Psychology and the Arts that I published in. It's peer reviewed. You send it in, it's peer reviewed, they publish it, but they don't charge. I mean, anybody can use it. It's just out there.
For people who aren't part of the Ivory Tower group, actually most of us in here are part of Academe, the Ivory Tower group, peer review is the process by which people say, hey, I wrote something, I should get my peers to review it and give me feedback. And typically a book or an article is held for review when you submit it to the editor of the journal. Not everything in my field of philosophy gets published. Some journals, like the Journal of Philosophy, publishes 5% of the things that are submitted to them. I'm not even sure that more than 30% of what is submitted to the Journal of Philosophy is actually even sent out for peer review. Because writing a peer review is actually kind of annoying. I've done it, You get someone's article, you don't know their name, because we don't want to publish things just because someone famous wrote it. We want to publish it because of the quality of the argument, the way that it addresses issues, that it's something that could be taught, that this is an article that people will write dissertations about, or at least will cite in their dissertations. And so when the editor gets the submission, they read it, they determine whether it's worth sending out and having other philosophers' time be spent on it. And so the article gets sent out, professional philosophers, in this case, read it, respond to it, give comments, it goes back to the editor, and those comments include whether we should publish it, whether we should make the person revise and resubmit it, whether we should reject it entirely because it's just not the sort of thing that we want associated with that prestigious journal. And usually 2 to 4 peers review each article before it gets published. And most articles get sent back as rejected or as revise and resubmit. So
the story that I like is there's a professor still at Berkeley who got the Nobel Prize for economics. And he couldn't get this article published that he got the Nobel Prize for.
Yep.
He tried and tried and tried and tried.
Because it didn't pass the scrutiny of his peers.
And and one editor says, we don't publish triviality.
So what was the venue that it was made available to the Nobel Prize Committee?
Yeah, eventually, I don't remember I've read, but I don't remember the particular journal, but it finally got into a journal.
Interesting. Well, I know if I were doing research and I came across a blog of somebody who, even somebody I knew, whose work I respected, I wouldn't use that as, I don't know, I think there's something different about just his blog or her blog compared to a peer-reviewed article in somewhere.
I think it depends on what you want to use their stuff for.
Well, I mean in another article or book.
Oh yeah. Would I cite blogs regularly and expect that I would get published in the Journal of Philosophy? Oh heck no. You have to be in the club to be in the club. And being in the club means you know people in the club, which means you know the other articles that you're supposed to cite. That's what peer-reviewed journals do, is they create this is what it means to be in the club. That's good. There are other ways of doing peer review that don't result in a physical journal. And like, as Dr. Barr was suggesting, there are some very good journals out there which are still go through this process of peers reading and writing and reviewing and saying, write it over again, and then we'll publish it. And then we'll include it in this group. It's just that probably they aren't printing out copies of it and charging people money for it. And you probably don't get prints of it as your payment for having your article published. And they've probably written a grant to support the editing staff of that journal. Or maybe a college or university who's interested in promoting knowledge being generated about that area is funding it. Well, because nobody works for free. Well, actually, some people do.
Brings up my question I wanted to ask. How can the Lockean theory of property explain or justify why either as a new scholar you get paid nothing for getting published as in a peer-reviewed journal, or I get emails now, they'll say, for this fee, you may submit your article to be considered to be published in a peer-reviewed journals. How does the Lockean theory of property explain that?
It explains it by saying that the Lockean theory of property isn't the only theory of property out there. and that some people won't work for free, and that the process of peer review, which we tend to think would be done for like the common good and advancing knowledge, that no, maybe people in your discipline expect to be paid just to tell you that you need to revise your paper.
But I suspect that's aimed at people who need tenure and are under pressure for that, and that way they can at least, show demonstration that they're publishing something.
I was subscribed more to the Hobson theory, and that it's power relations, and that those who have the power are going to protect the property which they produced. And if you don't have the power, in academia, that means that you haven't got tenure yet, or you haven't got widely published. Then your property, because it's your creative product, really isn't worth anything. You can't use it. So.
or it doesn't have enough value to others for them to want to help improve it.
Yeah.
And most journals now are pretty consolidated. There are just a few for-profit companies that, I mean, they're in it for, it's a business for them. It's not.
I mean, I don't think this
necessarily-
phenomenon challenges Locke's theory of property. I mean, he doesn't have to deny that you still have the property, it's just nobody has to pay you for it. I mean, just because you own your article doesn't mean that if you want to sell it to me, I have to buy it.
Yeah, but Locke's theory is about the right to property, or in the actual reality of owning the property, right? So who has the right to property? And that's based basically on your addition to the property that already exists in nature. So if you added value to what's in nature, then that becomes your property, long as you don't take in excess what others should have. Where in Hobbes, it's been a long time since I've read it, so I might be wrong here, but as I recall, I mean, basically it's a matter of that it's a social contract. If you don't take my property, I won't take your property, but it's a power relationship. And it seems to me that's the way the real world actually works.
Oh, that would be a whole nother Graves lecture, quite honestly. Because comparing and contrasting Locke and Hobbes and the state of nature and the origin of civil society, oh, it's so fascinating. It really is. Oh, Hobbes, oh, his 17th century English is so wonderful. We can learn about how the life of man is solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. Oh, yeah. Good times. Maybe next year.
Doesn't Locke say also that, for instance, the reason why European settlers could come here and take this land here is because the Native Americans did nothing to improve it. They didn't fence it off, they didn't labor on it, they just traveled through it. And so what does that say about if I don't take the intellectual ideas around me and prove them up, does that work too? I don't have a right to those? Brad gets them.
Well, I mean, there's a problem here. I mean, there's a certain parallel, or there's a certain way in which Locke's theory of property fits with intellectual property, in that it's based on labor, and we labor intellectually, and so we want compensation for that. But there's a sense in which it doesn't fit very well, in that there's not a commons in the same sense. That is, the commons that Locke is talking about in the quote there is, God gave the world to all of us to use, and so there is this thing out there before we even come along. Whereas when we're talking about the intellectual commons, we're talking about stuff that other humans created through their intellectual labor. We're not talking about something pre-existing there that I'm taking off a little chunk, mixing my labor with, and then I get to call it mine. And also, and this comes up in the proviso as well, with tangible stuff, if I have it, you don't. With ideas, we can both have the same idea, and so that's why the proviso just doesn't make as much sense for intellectual property, because I can steal your idea and I'm leaving as nothing as good for everybody. And so, because there's the commons there is not this tangible stuff that when I take, it's not there anymore.
But what does that do with patent law? For instance, the patent law states that one can patent a life form, which existed before, but all you've done is changed it.
I mean, as Dr. Forstrom said, I don't think it works very well for intellectual property. As Dr. Forstrom said, there's other views of property rights, and so it seems to me that intellectual property rights are handled much better by a utilitarian view of rights. That is, if we think about things like stuff going into public domain, or a drug company researches a drug, and then at a certain point, other companies get to make generic versions of it. And so, if you're thinking about a natural Lockean right to property, it's kind of weird that it fades away after 7 years, or that I don't get to pass it on to my children. And if I appropriate a chunk of land, we have homesteads that are in the family for generations, whereas intellectual property doesn't work. And so if we have a utilitarian view of property where we say, well, look, what we're trying to do with our property rights is not capture some sort of natural right. It's set up some rules that lead to a well-functioning society. Then we say we've got two things we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to give people incentive for laboring, engaging in intellectual labor, and so we give them this property right for a little period of time, but we also realize a great value by sharing ideas, and this is where the Creative Commons comes in, that when it comes to ideas, the more we can share, the much better off society is. And so we kind of split the difference, and we say, okay, we'll give you a little intellectual property for a while to incentivize people to come up with ideas, but it's gonna go away after a bit, so we can reap the benefits of shared ideas.
Nicely put.
But does it make any difference though, like an individual versus corporations? Like for example, if I write a book and then after I don't know how many years that I don't have rights, so it becomes commons property or whatever. But if Google or some other corporations has a digital version of it, I think that law does not apply to Google. They can actually keep it for whatever number of years, or you know what I'm saying. So it's like individual versus corporations, how they own stuff.
And who gets the benefit of your work?
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. So maybe
yeah, and they have trade secrets. So you know, Coca-Cola owns the intellectual property to the formula for Coca-Cola, and you know that's something that they'll
will keep it, you know, so,
right.
So they have a different standard. So I guess that's where the debate is nowadays, that you know how much those big corporations will have that monopoly rights, you know, access, so that they can restrict access, or they will sell it to you. Your idea, you know, it was there. Like for example, just to take an extreme example, they can take a picture of our library here, nice building. And then they can say, oh, this is my property now, so if you want to use it, so you will have to buy it from me now. So that's why I think things are moving, and that's where the fight is, I believe.
Because the Retta King Library is really kind of a cool building, and so I'm sure they would command quite a price for photos of it. Oh, yes. But if they did try to sell it, do you think Chadron State College would be kind of annoyed that they were trying to profit from our beloved icon? Yes.
Yeah.
Unless we got a hefty donation. In which case it'd probably be perfectly.
And how can I commission them? Yes.
We actually got rules on that, right? So about how, as faculty, we can use the CSC logo and other things, you know, related to the campus. And so so I guess CSC as an institution has a property right, which makes this a whole other question about, we've been talking about people having property rights. Institutions are collections of people, but then that gets into a whole other interesting can of worms about you know,
that would be another great
institutional, and when people are no longer around, but the institution survives, the institution retains, or some can, depending on the law, retain property rights to the intellectual property that was produced because somebody who is no longer here was under contract to that. So again, I mean, how does Locke justify that?
Oh, we're not going to go there tonight. But there's a lot of questions about property, about who creates it, who owns it, and what you can do with it. It's a very lively debate among philosophers, and has been for a very long time. Thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.